have an 0.8. If you have a faster rate of metabolism, if you burn it off at 0.3 per hour, 2.5 hours, then you're going to add another 0.075 onto that, and you'd be at 0.16. So the range could be anywhere from an 0.8 up to a 1.6, but if he's average, it would be somewhere around 0.9.
But we need to give the person the benefit of the doubt, right? Because we don't know what that rate is.
Right.
And so what you're saying is when we talk about this rate, it can be anywhere from a 0.009 all the way up to, in the mid-threes, a 4-fold variation, right?
That's correct.
That's a huge variation in this type of field, isn't it?
No, well, it's just when you have dealing with large populations, a variation like that in enzyme metabolism is not unexpected.
Well, it's also because this rate, there's a lot of factors that go into what happens when your body metabolizes alcohol, right?
Well, you're talking about two different things. No, the rate of alcohol metabolism depends on the liver, and it depends on your native complement of alcohol dehydrogenase, and it depends on how much you've induced the inducible enzyme that also burns it off. That depends somewhat on your history of drinking. If you're a heavy drinker, you'll burn it off faster. If you are a novice drinker, you're probably average or less. Now, that is the spread of the population, so without knowing if you're average or fast, again, you can still give the range because it's known in the general population what the extremes are. So in this case, again, if he is an average around the time of the stop, so he's post-absorptive, he's an 0.9. If he has a low rate of metabolism, he's an 0.8. If he has a higher rate of metabolism, he's a 1.2 or thereabouts.
And that's only if you're assuming that his blood alcohol has already peaked and is going down by the time he's stopped, right?
That's correct.
So let me give you a little hypothetical here, and I've drawn it out for you. Say at the time of the stop, we know that the person is a 0.04 blood alcohol level. And then they go up to a 0.08, and then 2 hours and 20 minutes later, they're at 0.06. Is this something that's possible?
It's probably possible. It's probably not real likely because
Well, yes or no, is it possible?
Oh, it's probably possible.
And it's not out there in outer space possible, but yeah, that's a real possibility.
I think it's close to outer space because 2.5 hours from 0.8 to 0.6 is slower than the low range of metabolism.
Well,
so
but you're talking about blood alcohol going up, though, right? We're not talking about peak levels coming down. We're talking about the blood alcohol going up.
I thought you were talking about the whole thing.
The whole thing, yes.
Well, that part is probably not very likely. I would say that's very unlikely.
Well, what if it was over here? If it goes up to a 0.08 and it goes down? I don't know. I just drew it. I mean, this is not an exact
Well, you
graph.
have to figure out how much alcohol you're talking about. To go from an 0.4 to an 0.8 is 2 beers or 2 shots. Again, how and what time frame are you talking about them drinking that? If you're talking about beer, an 0.6 to an 0.8 is more likely than an 0.4 to an 0.8 because you're...
Well, we don't know, though. What if it's liquor?
Well, if it's liquor, it is more likely that the increase would be faster. It's steeper.
Right. But we don't know any of these things.
I don't know them.
Right. And so when you make this calculation, you're basically guessing. You're guessing that his blood alcohol level is already at its peak, right? Because you don't know.
I'm not guessing. I'm not guessing at all because when there have been studies based on also scenarios like this that are presented in court and how often that they actually correspond to what really happened, and it is much more common that people are post-absorptive when they've stopped, and that the absorption is not, you don't drink all of your alcohol right before you stop and you're absorbing it on the way up and coming down. That is not very common. That is not very likely. This is not a guess. This is based on reports in the literature and also our experience in the laboratory and other cases that we have been in.
Common and uncommon is not beyond a reasonable doubt, though, right?
I have
Are you 100% certain that his blood alcohol level was at the peak rate based on the information that you have?
Not 100%, no.
Okay. Now, the leading theorists in this area, Dubowski, he's found this retrograde extrapolation to be less than exact science, right?
No, Dubowski doesn't like it. I would not say he's the leading theorist in this area. He doesn't like it, but he says if you're going to do it, there needs to be all these other things that are known.
And not only that, but you're supposed to, as a toxicologist testifying, come up and tell the jury about all these other factors that come into play with retrograde extrapolation, right?
Yes.
Okay. And what about Dr. Jones? He calls this dubious, doesn't he?
He has a 90, I think it's a 1 paper where he says that, and a 95 paper where he says something else. thing about Dr. Jones is he has published so many papers and he reverses himself frequently or modifies his prior opinion. He has an earlier paper where he doesn't like it much, and he has a later paper where he is a little bit more accepting of it, or under certain circumstances it is possible to be done.
But he has the same concerns, though, I mean, in all the papers.
Well, whenever you're doing anything that is, you're supposed to figure all the factors in before you do the calculation, yes. I mean, everybody's going to say that, and I would agree with that.
And you would agree that in order to really make an exact calculation, you need to know a whole lot of factors that aren't present in this case.
Yes, I would need to know that. But without those, I can give you a range and I can give you an estimation.
But that range isn't even accurate because you don't know very important factors. Probably the most important factor would be to know when the last drink was, right?
The range is accurate. I'm not the one who's determined the range. The range of metabolism is 009 to 036. That's Jones. I'm giving you what his blood alcohol level would have been at the outsides of those range and in the inside, in the average of those range. Which is the most applicable here is not really for me to decide.
Now, let's talk about Goldberg. You're aware of him too, right?
Yes.
And in his study, he said that there's little appreciation for the uncertainty involved in retrograde extrapolation when people are testifying about it in court, right?
Yeah, he's a statistician and also a Washington Highway Patrol officer. He's done a lot of statistical studies. So when he talks about uncertainty, he's talking about statistical uncertainty, mathematical uncertainty.
Okay. Now, just give me a second here. There's been studies that have been put out there that even what kind of drinks you're drinking can change your metabolism, correct? Like if there's something with sugar in there versus carbonation, stuff like that, right?
Not going to change your basal metabolic rate, no, not by any appreciable amount. There's one study, I don't have it with me, but something about the carbonation could change the absorption, but not change the metabolic rate or the rate at which your liver metabolizes ethanol.
Well, in that study, don't they say that when we're talking about food absorbing into your system, alcohol absorbing into your system, that somebody who has a lower amount of alcohol initially in their system, that the absorption would be lower, right? It would take longer, correct?
If you're drinking it with food, it'll take longer for it to be absorbed.
And what about if you have a low amount of alcohol to begin with? If you didn't go out there and get wasted, you just have a low amount of alcohol to begin with. Multiple studies suggest that elimination will be slower too than somebody that has a whole lot of blood alcohol in their system.
There are multiple studies suggesting that. I'm aware of studies that if you're a really heavy drinker, that you will eliminate it faster, and that actually after when you get down to very, very low alcohol levels, like below an 01, the profile changes from 0 order to first order. That isn't really very applicable because below an 01, you're going to be reported out as negative anyway.
Now, with all of these, and I'm almost done here, but with all of these studies and things like that, they're all done in like laboratories, aren't they?
Some of them are done in labs.
Well, the ones that you've been talking about mostly were done in labs, right?
Not all of them. Some of them, a lot of Jones' studies are not done in labs. They're done in they're field studies. So there were cases where for some reason they've got 2 blood draws or they've got a blood and a breath sample, and you can compare the 2 over time. He's got some studies like that as well. So these are not all lab studies. Some of them are real world.
So the Jones studies, the ones that I was talking about with the ranges of how fast your body eliminates alcohol, could be, they're 4-fold. Those are real life studies, right?
He's got more than one paper to that, but yes.
And all these other ones are people going in the lab in the morning and then they just give them a whole lot of alcohol at once and then they test their blood and stuff, right?
Some of them are like that. There are a lot of papers to this effect that have been looking at this issue for many years. Some of them are real world, some of them are lab studies.
Okay. Now, Dr. Glenn, without knowing when the last drink happened, without knowing when and how much food was eaten prior to or during the drinking, without knowing the proof of the alcohol, without knowing the type of the drink, without knowing the person's metabolic rate, without having multiple blood tests over a period of time, without knowing all this stuff, would you be willing to risk your life that his blood alcohol was exactly a 0.09, 2 hours and 20 minutes before?
I would risk my life that it was within the range I gave you.
Okay, and that would be a .09, right? To a point.
No, a .08 to a .12.
So it would have to be right on the line at a .08.
Yes.